Hello babes and babes, welcome back to my channel. My name is Elisa, if you've never been here before. Today we're gonna do something that is long overdue. I had to tick it off my to-do list. We are going to extend the poppy pattern pack with the version that comes with the big oversized puff sleeves. If you don't know what I'm talking about, at the beginning of this year I launched a 3-top pattern pack on my Etsy shop, and the one that stood out the most and the one that you guys love the most is called the Poppy Blouse, and she looks like this. When I first launched this pattern, I decided quite intentionally to give her oversized shoulders and a fitted straight sleeve to make it look really cool and effortless and easy. However, a couple of weeks ago, I did a destashing video, and it's actually longer than a couple of weeks. It's probably more like a month and a half. I actually took that pattern and I hacked it and I gave it more narrow shoulders as well as an oversized statement sleeve. And you guys loved it so much and asked me if I could add that to the pattern as it exists right now, and I've done it, it is there. So from today onwards, if you buy the poppy pattern, you will not only get the pattern as you've known it up until now, you will also get the pattern with the adjusted shoulder and sleeve option. In addition to that, I also added a facing pattern piece to be exact, because I realized while I marketed the pattern to be specifically beginner friendly, a lot of the beginners out there were struggling with how to create the facing for the blouse, so you don't have to do that anymore. The facing pieces are right there for you to use. And I also added a second front tie closure strap option for you to use. I would suggest going for the wider one for the oversized shoulder / fitted straight sleeve option, which I call Poppy 1/View A, and the more narrow spaghetti type straps I would use for the oversized statement sleeve. I created 2 entirely new poppy blouses, one with the straight sleeve and one with the statement sleeve. I'm gonna interchange the footage that I filmed while making both of them, because all of the steps for both of the blouses are entirely the same. The only thing that really differentiates Poppy 1 from Poppy 2 is how you finish the sleeves. So up until that point, we're gonna see the red and the green version interchanged, and then I'm gonna separate the two, show you how to make each sleeve, and to finish it all off, I'm gonna show you how to attach the facing. So that's all I had to say. Let's jump right into it. We are starting off by assembling our front and back bodice. Before we can do that, we need to sew in the darts. I have one in the bust and I have one in the shoulder of the back bodice. The way I like to do this is to simply place a pin at the dart apex like this. I then grab either tailor's chalk or a removable fabric pin like this. I remove my paper pattern, and I then place a little dot right where my pin penetrates the fabric, which simply marks where exactly I need to stop sewing. To mark the width of my darts, I've placed some notches right at the dart legs. You will learn why that is important if you watch my tutorial on how to add seam allowance to your pieces. And I am now going to sew my darts in. I simply fold the fabric right sides touching. I maybe place a pin at the end of my dart just to keep the fabric folded, and I sew down the dart. To get a super clean result, instead of back stitching at the end of my dart, I just leave the seam open and then tie the 2 top and bottom thread together. Then I trim back what's left, and that's how I like to sew in my darts. It's very important to give this a good press right away. That results in a clean finish at the end. Now let me sew in the rest of my darts. So my bust as well as my shoulder darts are in now, and before I take this to my iron for the first time, I'm simply gonna plop back and front right sides touching on top of each other, and I'm going to pin together my shoulders as well as my side seams. I can then go and press my darts, my shoulders and my side seams all in one go. I'm now going to sew as well as serge my shoulders and side seams, and then I'm gonna give everything a good press. So effectively we have made a little vest now, and that is true for both views A and B. So let's move on to the peplum. The peplum pattern looks like this. Now you can have a play with this. It really depends on your fabric format. So some fabrics come in 120 centimeter width, some come in 140, some in 160. You would usually then fold that in half. So for example, if you had 140 centimeter width fabric, you would then end up with a width of 70 centimeters on the fold. Now that would be probably too narrow for this. If you place this with the center back on a fold and you place it down on your fabric, it's gonna just jot over the side of it for a little bit. You can smartly refold your pattern to get the exact pattern piece size of the peplum. Generally speaking, you can have a play with the volume of the peplum. You can go ahead and cut this twice to get a really voluminous peplum. You can just use this once to get a very subtle peplum. Today I'm going to do something in between. I just utilized the fabric width that I had, which was 60, and I cut that times 2. So I have 2 of the same pieces, which are each 60 centimeters long, which makes this whole piece 120 centimeter wide, times 2 makes it 240 centimeter for the entirety of my peplum. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to simply place one end of my peplum right sides touching, and I'm going to sew that down. This seam will eventually sit in my center back. This is the best placement for it. So now I have my center back seam. I'm going to press this really neatly, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to serge the entirety of one side of the peplum as well as both of the front sides. I'm going to serge them, and then I'm going to fold them over by 1 centimeter and top stitch them down. This immediately finishes the length of the peplum as well as the 2 center front sides. So now that I have prepared the peplum in this way, what I will do as well is add 2 rows of basting stitches to this upper edge of the peplum so I can prepare it for it to be gathered down to the circumference of the underbust seam and the bodice. The basting stitches are on. And now we have a seam in the center back, so I don't need to place a notch there for the alignment with the bodice. However, I also want to place a notch on the half point of each of my sides, and that is the notch that is going to align with my side seams and bodice. And that is just so that I have 4 equal sized spaced sections that I need to ruffle down to the 4 equally sized sections of the bodice. So when I grab my bodice vest now, what I will do is I place it upside down on the table in front of me so I have a good view of the center back notch. Then I grab my peplum, I place it right sides touching, center back seam down onto the notch in the bodice. That's where I place my first pin. I then find the notch that I've just created in the halfway point towards the center front and place that on the side seam of my bodice on both sides. And then I align the front of the peplum with the center front of my bodice. However, I'm going to pin it down 1 centimeter shy of the edge of the bodice because this is the seam allowance that we need to place the facing later. So I'm just going to pin it down right here. So now that the peplum is pinned to the bodice, we can see the ease appear in each of the sections. So this is 1/2 of the center back, and this is the ease that we have to gather down to fit this section, and the same applies to the front sides. Now I'm just grabbing the 2 upper or lower threads of the basting stitches that I have placed. It doesn't matter which ones, I think both work. And I just grab them, and then I start to pull and push the fabric over the threads, and that gathers down the peplum for me. Pretty easy. And I do that until both the peplum and the bodice underbust seam have the same distance, something like that. Once they do, I tie up my basting stitches so nothing comes undone, and then I just redistribute the gathering along the section that I'm doing right now to make sure everything is nicely distributed. And then I pin it down, and I do this 4 times now to gather down all of the peplum to the width of the underbust seam of the bodice. So I have now pinned the peplum to the top. I'm now going to sew it down and then serge the seam. Now that the bodice, the main piece of our blouse, is put together and looks like this, we can focus on the sleeves, and the sleeves are the only thing that differentiate Poppy 1/View A to Poppy 2/View B. For this first view, View A, we do have a fitted sleeve which looks like this. We are now going to sew together the sleeve inseam for starters before we pin and sew it into our armholes. To sew the sleeve inseam, you simply fold both of your sleeves right sides touching. You then sew and serge it, honoring your seam allowance, which for me is 1 centimeter. Once you've done that, the sleeve sort of looks like this. We can now grab our vest, turn it right sides out. We're going to start with one armhole first. The sleeves do not have a right or a left side, they're identical. I'm also going to turn my sleeve right side out. I'm then grabbing the sleeve inseam and I'm placing it onto the side seam of my vest. I'm gonna make sure that the side seam and the inseam are placed dead center on top of each other. I then reach into the vest, grab that same point and pull it inside out. Now I'm going to find my center notch point in my sleeve shoulder, which needs to align with the shoulder seam of my vest. That's the next point I'm going to pin. Once I have these two, I can pin the rest of the sleeve into the armhole, distributing any ease that might occur. This is a fitted sleeve, so if you have marked and cut and sewn everything correctly, your medium, small or large seam will fit your medium, small or large armhole. I have now pinned the sleeve in. I moved everything a bit back and forth so all the ease disappeared and it's flatly pinned in. That also means that my shoulder notch moved a little bit to the front, but that's totally fine as long as it is in the shoulder apex area. I'm now going to sew this in and then serge it. Serge the ends of our sleeves like we have done with the peplum. Fold them over by either a minimal amount or you can shorten the sleeves, that is up to you. I'm going to fold them over by about 2 centimeters and then I'm going to top stitch them. Poppy 2 has a quite oversized puff sleeve. We have this substantial piece right here. What we do is we place both sleeves, we separate them and then we place them right sides touching. We then go ahead and sew the sleeve inseam right here. You would do the same thing for the fitted sleeve. And I also right away serge the cuff of my sleeve. Once I have serged the inseam as well as the cuff, I'm gonna take this to my iron and I'm gonna fold it over by about 1 centimeter. I'm then going to press this down, and this is so I prepare the tunnel that is going to hold my elastic that's gonna ruche up the cuff. So now this is pressed, I'm gonna stitch it down. So the tunnel is created. I deliberately left a small section open here and I'm gonna use this to insert my elastic. I have a 1 centimeter elastic right here that fits perfectly, and what I'm gonna do is I wrap it around the widest part of my upper arm and I give myself a little bit of an overlap right here. I cut this and then I cut a second piece that is the exact perfect size, so no waste. What do we say to that? When you have measured and cut your elastic, you grab a safety pin and you insert it into the elastic, and you then go into your tunnel with the safety pin first and feed it through. Once the elastic is fed through, I just overlap it like this. I then place a needle and put it in my machine and just sew over the elastic a couple of times. I then let the elastic jump into the tunnel and I sew the tunnel shut. So this is what our sleeves look like now, and we can insert them into our blouse. So what I do is I just place the blouse in front of me. So one sleeve hole is facing up, armhole. One armhole is facing up. I then grab one sleeve and I place it with the sleeve inseam onto the side seam of the blouse like that. You could offset it a little bit to the front if you wanted to, because this is where we move our arms. Because this is so oversized, it doesn't really matter. I just place it right onto the side seam. I then pin the first few centimeters of my sleeve / armhole flat to both sides. I then reach into the blouse and catch a hold of the side seam and I pull it inside out like this. Then I find the center notch of my sleeve, that would be the highest point of the shoulder of the sleeve, and I place that onto the shoulder seam. I then continue to pin the sleeve flat for just a little bit further on both sides. And now I want to make a decision how widely spread I want the ease to be. It could be really focused just around the shoulder seam. It could be spread out a little bit towards the front and the back. But the point is you want to gather down this ease to the distance that you have in your actual armhole of the bodice. I do like to do this by hand, so I simply go ahead and start pleating my ease away / down to the distance that I have, and I just count the pleats that I place on one side and then I try to reproduce that to the other side. So I have 3 now, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the sleeve is in on one side. Now I reproduce that, like I said, to the other side. Here we go. The sleeve is pinned in and now we can sew it in. So before we finish up the blouse by attaching the facing, we need to sew our straps. You have 2 strap options in the pattern. I'm going for the more narrow one for Poppy 2. What I do with those is I simply place them right sides touching like this, and I sew around the outer edges before I then turn them around with a chopstick. What I like to do is I grab a piece of string. This is a new trick I've learned. You then go ahead and give it a really good knot on one end. You want it to be quite substantial because this is going to be your anchor. So this is what I've done. This has a couple knots in here now. Now I take one long string, which is eventually going to be cut in 2. I fold it in half and I place the string that I've just knotted up into it like this. I now sew over this way and then all the way down, and I can use this later to overturn the strap. Once this is sewn down, ideally when I pull this string and I create some tension on it, I can use this to overturn the strap. The straps have been pressed and now I have 6 straps that I need to complete the blouse. Before we can attach them, we have to prepare our facing. You will find facing pieces in the paper pattern which look like this. This is the front side of the facing and this is the back side of the facing. And they need to join together here at the shoulder seam. And this is what we're going to do first. This is what the facing looks like when it is sewn together. I'm now going to go ahead and serge the entirety of the outer perimeter of it to clean it up. Like this. Now that we have the facing assembled, we have our straps prepared, we can grab our blouse and finish everything up. I need to place the facing right sides touching with the bodice / the actual blouse, and I do want to make sure that my shoulder seams match up perfectly. So this is where I place my first pins. I then make sure the center back notches match up, which they do, and then move on to the front and continue pinning the facing to my shell. Once the neckline is pinned, I can grab my straps and have a think about the placement. Now the pattern actually has the strap placement indicated with these little boxes right here, so I can take that, place it onto my actual blouse and use that as a reference, Or you could try the blouse and place the straps how you feel they should sit on your body. This is totally up to you. Once you have decided on the placement, you go ahead, take the strap one after the other, you sandwich it in between the facing and your actual blouse. You make sure that up here it is 1 centimeter below the actual edge of your neckline right here, and that is because that is your seam allowance. And you do want to make sure that this is exactly where your first strap sits. And I do place my needles so that I can see exactly where the strap is placed, and that just helps me stick the landing. And then I pin the rest of my straps, always making sure that they sit on the same height on both sides, so when we actually tie up the blouse they meet each other. Now don't forget that down here we gave ourselves 1 centimeter of seam allowance when we placed the peplum, and this is exactly again where you want to stick the landing, attaching the facing. So to attach the facing, I'm just going to sew up one side of the center front, around the neck hole, over the center back, and down the other side of the center front. I'm then going to remove some bulk that I can find in the corners of the facing where it attaches to the bodice, and I'm then going to overturn everything and give it a good press. It always helps to add some snips around curved seams to make sure the facing overturns nicely and lies flat later. Don't forget to understitch your facing to make sure it's not showing on the outside once you wear it. To finish off the facing, I also make sure that I serge this raw edge down here. I then fold the peplum up like this and the facing over like that. And we're now going to sew the facing down to the seam that attaches the peplum to the bodice. Just make sure that you do not sew over your strap that is also somewhere in here. And basically what you can think is just top stitch again on that same seam that you have here already. Once that is done, you can remove some of the bulk that you find here, just a little bit. And when you now pull your peplum out, you will find a beautifully overturned end of your facing that is now cleaned up on the inside as well. Clean up my room now after this shoot that took about 1 hour. These things take longer than you might think. I'm so lucky. I have 4 of these beautiful poppy blouses now, and I've already been wearing them so much. I wore this one to Paris, I wore this one to a trip to Croatia earlier this year, and I just love them. They're so great to style, they're so easy to wear, they're so comfortable. You don't have to wear anything beneath them if you don't want to. Anyway, I digress. What I wanted to say is, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope everything was super clear. If there's anything that you're unsure about, don't hesitate to reach out in the comments. I will try to answer every single comment as best as I can. Also, if you do give the pattern a try, I would love to see your version. You could either post it on Instagram using the hashtag #ThrillsAndStitchesPoppy so all of us can find your beautiful version of the sewing pattern, or you could leave a review on my Etsy shop with a photo of your make. I know today wasn't necessarily featuring any new projects. I know that we've all seen these blouses before, but I'm so glad I finally was able to update the pattern, and I hope you enjoyed the video regardless. And with that being said, next week we're gonna do a destashing. I know you guys love that type of content, and I get it, you know, it's the instant gratification that we all love. So I'm gonna give it to ya next week. See you there. I think 4 projects. Three projects. And yes, my wardrobe is very full. Don't judge me.